Hi, everyone. We're back again with The Shift. Today, we want to look at a subject that's been showing up in the media once or twice over the past 2 years. Very kind of innocuous statements about money coming back to Kenya, proceeds from corruption and crime that has been stashed away, that we're getting it back. What's a bit concerning, though, is the way that it's coming back. And I want to delve into that subject today with my namesake, Rose Wanjiru. Just have to shout the name Rose in the studio today and somebody will answer. And first, let me just ask her to introduce herself, who she is and what she does.
Thank you, Rose. Yes, as you've mentioned, my name is Rose Wanjiru. I am a governance and public finance management consultant and expert. I also work as an executive director for Center for Economic Governance, and I also support work that has been initiated in Kenya by Civil Forum for Asset Recovery, in short, CIFA. So, yeah, I'm delighted to be here with you and to have a delve into this interesting topic.
Yeah, so like I said, I've been noticing these news items about assets being returned. Not a lot of detail in the news reports, but at least the money is coming back. Let's just start out at the top. Do we have any idea of the value of assets from corruption and crime that are held abroad for Africa, and if you have them for Kenya as well?
Okay, thank you so much. I think that's a really sort of a difficult question to answer because even most people who've done the study just have anecdotal sort of figures, a bit of sort of estimations. But the Bombeki talked about quite a colossal amount of illicit financial flows out of Africa, and the net value of which is much higher than even what we get as foreign direct investments or overseas development aid. So basically, if we did away with the losing of funds through or capital through corruption and illicit financial flows, we would actually do much better in Africa and perhaps wouldn't need any aid. So really there's a major problem with corruption.
Yeah, that's a huge amount. Why does it take so long? Because I mean, it's very difficult to follow this story because you'll see one small story for a couple of days and then it'll take years before the next little dribble comes through. Why does
Yeah,
it
and
take so long to return these assets?
it's a major issue. And you had actually asked how much has come back to Kenya. I think we've
Yes.
had a couple of returns, and even then we just hear of the information the last minute, and therefore we're not able to totally do the analysis, walk the journey with the state parties that are discussing and negotiating for the return. So I would just say the latest that was reported last year, I think around March 2022, we were informed that £3 million supposed to come back to Kenya because of the cases related to Chris Okemo and Samuel Gishuru. The two, Samuel was the managing director of Kenya Power and Lighting in the years actually 1998 to 2002, and Chris was the Minister of Energy then. So it is said that there was a lot of these were actually proceeds of corruption, bribery for services and goods provided to Kenya Power. And you can imagine that is 2 decades ago when the cases began. And now it's only last year when the actual figure for what will come back was stated in signed, and that happened I think when the two governments of Jersey and Kenya were signing an agreement for the return of the money. So, and when you follow that story, as you're saying, it's quite complicated because eventually it's not the suing of the two gentlemen and being extradited that has actually led to the return of the money, but it's a different case altogether, which was related to companies that they had established that decided the enablers decided to actually plead guilty, and then the cases were moved on from 2016. So these particular cases from 2016 ended, and finally it was agreed that £3 million will come to Kenya. Actually, what was recovered was 3.82 million pounds, and then in the agreement, the two governments decided the 0.82, which is 820,000 pounds, would be would remain with the government of Jersey as part of their covering of costs for the cases. Yeah, so it's complicated. And the other bit you'll notice from these cases is that the initial work was actually done by the government of Jersey and not our own government. So part of the challenge is the cross-border, exchanges, dialogue, judicial processes are complicated. But you can imagine that in most cases, these cases are initiated by the country where the money is stashed. So I don't know. Maybe I would say that our governments also fail us because they do not pursue the corrupt, and they do not follow up these cases themselves.
That kind of puts a dent in what I was going to suggest, because it has always seemed to me very as if the discussion is being externalized, removed from us. And I thought it was deliberate, but it sounds, from what you're saying, it sounds like there actually is no impetus from the continent to bring this money back and to hold people to account. There's been report of an agreement called FRAC. Tell us a little bit about this. It's been hailed as innovative, novel, and it's one of the things that first caught my eye, because I was wondering, why are the governments of Switzerland, Jersey, UK, US, why are they discussing our money out there and how it should come back? What is FRAC? What does it do? Why is it necessary?
Yeah. So FRAC is a framework of agreement between those five
What does it
countries.
stand for first?
Actually, the way we're so used to acronyms, sometimes that can be a bit challenging. I know I might end up saying the wrong thing, but it's actually the framework of agreement. Let me just. I was just trying to get the full name. I was supposed to check and make sure everything is okay before. But it's a
That's okay.
framework for the return of assets from corruption and crime in Kenya. So this
Okay.
this this framework really puts the parties, as we call them in the framework, the state parties agree that they will collaborate to make sure that all the proceeds from corruption, money laundering, and other corrupt proceedings are brought back to Kenya. And so the idea initially was to really, because there are quite a number of cases. In Switzerland, we actually have the Anglo-Leasing case.
Oh, well.
And we had the Chris Okemo case in Jersey. And we do have several cases going on even in US. Some of it maybe for drug barons. So these ideas this idea was just to fast track this, because as you've rightly said, it takes long to just get the negotiations going, putting in place what is required, and like you said, the initiatives so far have been from the north. They've been from the countries where the money has been stashed, the assets have been stashed. So for them, first, they see no goodwill in our governments in terms of pushing or providing what is required as evidence. You see, at the end of the day, sometimes there's the evidence that is required from a country, but also there is, all that is needed for the government of Kenya to really confirm and provide an enabling environment for this money to come back and to confirm to the parties that it will be used in the right way. So I think the framework was just to make sure that everyone is in agreement, and so that they don't return to discuss the same things with different countries. So it was helpful to just have all the parties together, so that as they discuss one return, it can apply to the other in terms of the agreement. But in terms of the reasons for the delay, mostly is what I've said. There's some very weak political, maybe, interest and support, because half the time, some of these cases implicate the same people who are supposed to be making these decisions. You know,
Okay.
yeah.
No,
So that's the
I
problem.
think it's quite evident to all of us. The cases in the UK and in Jersey concerning Gishuru and Okemo, they've already been completed. People have served their sentences. They've been fined. They've been concluded, and we have been asked to extradite people. We see every day the shenanigans that go on. And I think that's not the only case. I think I've seen cases of bribery, um, involving the World Bank. World Bank officials in the New York, they've been sentenced, served their cases. We had Chicken Gate scandal in Kenya around elections. Those people I think that it was in UK, they've served their sentences, moved on, and we've prosecuted nobody. So I understand the reluctance to just kind of give money back to a government that won't deal with corruption. It's very evidently reluctant to deal with with people involved in corruption. But what
Yeah.
is interesting to
In the,
me
in
is,
the case of, just to correct, in the case of the Chicken Gate, we actually had a prosecution, I think
yes,
one or two, but Oswago, I think, who was the
yes,
CEO. There's a case going on, but it's taken years. It's still there, and
yes.
if anything, we if we want to go by the history of other cases, so we can't be so sure that it will result in much. Yeah, but
Yeah, but
there've been
I
some execution, but yeah, no
yeah.
judgment, no.
Yeah. I still
Yeah,
have a question, though, because when you look at the cases that Nigeria has managed to return, I think it's a very small fraction of what was taken out of Nigeria. And when they're returning the money looted by former President Sani Abacha, they returned it to government institutions. So it was returned, I think, to the social security, the presidential social security. It was returned to the presidential infrastructure fund. So it was returned to government, even though there was oversight, I think, from the World Bank. But in our case, it seems to be going to external organizations. It's going to companies, private companies, to NGOs, no matter how reputable they are. Though that is not government. Doesn't that kind of undermine the constitutionality of, the social contract between people and their government to mind their money? And who oversights these bodies? Who chooses them? Who decides that they are the ones who will best serve Kenyans?
yeah. All right. Yeah, I think the Nigeria cases are interesting because while the like especially the Abacha one, they call it the Abacha one, the funds first went through government, but were executed by uh, different agencies or monitored by at least World Bank. But the main thing with the first return was that the impact to the society was felt more, just because the funds went straight to the most vulnerable people. So the impact of that particular return was much appreciated. However, there was the feeling that there was still some interference, as you may know, that sometimes even among the poor, you know, who determines who's a poor, how do they
Yeah.
get the resources? Eventually, that still can be corrupted. So the subsequent returns were actually a little bit similar to the what we're going to have right now with the just return, only that this time it was private sector implementing the construction infrastructure projects. I think construction of a road and a bridge. So in our case, the just return, they also call it novel in the sense that there's a feel that it's a third party implementing, third party meaning civil, non-state actors, and um, in my view, there's a challenge, even though that was a route taken. It may not necessarily be bad or not. It doesn't undermine our sovereignty in that sense, but I sense that my main challenge with it is the lack of transparency, lack of sufficient engagement of the public. And why I'm saying that is because normally government does receive like ODA or grants, and many times we may receive in goods and kind. um, so in this case, there was, of course, there's a weakness, because if the resources came directly, they'll go to the exchequer, they'll be budgeted in the normal way. But this time round, one of the things that I got to understand is that while they were negotiating between 2016 to 2020, and they considered COVID as the main need, suddenly there was a splash in most of our leading newspapers about the COVID millionaires and billionaires. In other
Yeah.
words, a lot of resources had been stolen, uh, resources that had come to help Kenya during the pandemic. So suddenly, even if you are the one wanting to return the money, you would hesitate, because if we are not, we
Yes.
have systems, but maybe we don't have the will to fight corruption. We do have the systems, and we can manage resources correctly. We have the right policies, we have the right legal framework, but all
Right.
that requires actually a political goodwill. Yeah. So
Yeah.
and I would say why FRAC succeeded, or rather why we had the FRAC, was because at that time there was already an indication that there was political goodwill. The former president had already declared, for instance, that we lose 2 billion daily, and he was trying to see how to fight corruption.
Yes.
We even had from the ethics and anti-corruption, I think a couple of years before, that we lose about 600 million. So the president had said 2 billion, but the anti-corruption had said 600 billion annually. So when you look at those two figures, basically the two when you look at the statements, meant a third of our budget, our public budget, is lost through corruption
Lost.
annually. So if we could seal those loopholes, if we could seal the leakage, if we could make it, we could ensure there's a deterrent towards
Evidence.
corruption,
Yeah.
then we would do much, but we'll be more successful as a nation. There'll
I
be
mean,
more.
I hear what you're saying about the need to provide evidence that we're serious about fighting corruption. There really is none, even to the citizens of the country. We see that, but it still concerns me that our own institutional structures, our treasury, our budget, Office of Budget, Controller of Budget, the Attorney, the Auditor General, all these institutions, the parliamentary oversight, we're not strengthening them, we're actually bypassing them. And so there's still that concern that I think is lingering and needs to be addressed. And I'm not sure that it can be addressed just by creating a new framework. And all countries go through corruption, all countries have to build their institutions. So I still feel like there's a gap. But having said that, I think you mentioned earlier that of the money that's returned to Kenya, was it 800 million? No,
No, it's not.
800,000 was being retained to cover costs of investigation.
Yeah.
What percentage is held by governments who investigate, these crimes?
Generally, each case is unique. I think usually the process of freezing, investigating. We normally say there's the prejudicial, then the judicial phase, the
Yeah.
prosecution phase, and then judicial phase, and then now the management and the return of the resources. So basically, that depends from case to case. Like the way you asked about the Nigeria about your return. Already in that particular one, there were quite a number of institutions, multilateral institutions involved.
Yes.
So that tells you that already the overhead costs can be high, just depending on who is included in the negotiations, in the dialogue, but also in the implementation. So in our case, we have two institutions, the Crown Agents and the AMREF.
Yeah.
And £3 million will be returned. And when you look at, in fact, one of the issues I was also having with that is when you look at the exchange rate at the time they announced, that was 450 million Kenya shillings. But if you look at it today, if you look at the exchange rate and maybe if you consider the interests over 1 year, that it should at least increase by almost 100 million more. So those are some of the things that we're unsure about around, and institutions like ours seek to to have further information to confirm, is there an inclusion of the interest gained over time,
Yes.
how the implementation happened, what are the costs. All that has not been provided yet.
Okay.
And then
Okay.
you will also notice that since they announced in 2022, it's over a year, and it looks like so far the implementation has not happened. There are delays, but also there has not been any report. And you see, and they had said the report would come in. There will be an interim report, and that is an indication that there's been a delay in the implementation, which is still saying a lot, because if the information had been shared,
Yes.
we would really know what's happening. We would also hold our governments to account, but everything is a little opaque. Yeah.
Okay. Finally, as we wrap up, we've seen in the Kenya case the involvement of Crown Agents, which is a private company, not for profit, but still a private company, the involvement of AMREF as the vehicles which were chosen to return the aid, I mean, to return the assets to the country. I'm always wary when I see institutions, new institutions, and piling in. And is there any risk of this evolving to become a new kind of business? Because in many ways it resembles how development aid started. I mean, it became formalized, and then the channels become formalized, and the players become formalized, and it's just very worrying. We saw Crown Agents expand their office in Kenya. I mean, I don't want to read too much into that. Maybe they're building a bigger presence, but just in brief, what are the dangers of creating a new business of returning aid to Africa?
Well, I wouldn't say that the dangers per se of in the context, or rather in the manner that you have sort of explained it, because um, they're using channels that have been used in aid generally. What I mean by that is, so for instance, crown agent, when it's receiving that money, it means it's receiving that money on behalf of Kenya. And the way this is documented or recorded in our financial statements, it's an aid in appropriation in aid, as it were. And this goes on even with donors that are in the country. We know, for instance, the USAID is usually wary of using, for instance, government systems, and is
Yeah.
always providing its support through other mechanisms, through other service providers. So, in terms of the approach that has been used, it's one that is common in the aid arena or in the aid sector. But I would say, if for me, my main concern has been if there had been more dialogue, if there had been more engagement with civil society and other non-state actors, where would we have put those resources? We may have gone a different route,
Yeah.
mostly, to support those who are, poor, or, poor and marginalized. Because when you look at how the government operates, there are many times the poor and the marginalized are not fully catered for. And that's why we have so many donor agencies, we have civil society trying to tackle that sector, the poverty sector, as it were. And so, for me, my concern is, did the choices, or the choices that were made, the right choices? Was there, where we're putting the resources? Was that the main need, or rather the best, as it were, the best way to spend the money? And then the mechanisms are sort of, secondary. But for me, again, with the mechanisms, is there, do we have sufficient transparency and accountability? I know the two governments have ensured that they will get, information, but the citizen is the main person who should be aware of how the money was spent. So, and so far we have no information, and that, so for me, that's like, that to me is the weakest link in this whole process. Yeah.
Well, I think we're going to give it a wrap, call it a wrap there. And I just want to thank you very much. I think it's really sad that as Africans, we have to watch our governments. It's almost like they're being babysat by other people to ensure that they behave properly and that they deliver the services. It's a very sad situation. But be that as it may, at least you have shed light on what's going on and the frameworks and the questions that are being asked. And I'm really happy to hear that people like you are actually engaging with this process. So I just want to say thank you very much for joining us. And I hope we get a chance to talk to you again so that you can update us on any changes as they happen. And yeah, thank you,
Thanks.
Rose.
It was a pleasure being here. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Goodbye.